Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Perrin Beatty, President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Monday's budget was historic in so many ways. The first federal budget ever to be presented by a female finance minister, coming at the height of the greatest health and economic crisis of our lifetimes, ending the longest stretch we've ever gone between budgets. And it's a big budget, historically big in its physical size, with 270 measures spread over 724 pages, big in terms of the spending it contains, and big in its ambitions for the country. Now, there's a lot to like for businesses of all sizes in the budget, and it was clear that the government was listening to many of the Canadian Chamber's suggestions. We'll get into the specifics of the various budget items that are important to business a little bit later, but there's some meaningful help for our members, and particularly SMEs and companies in hard-hit sectors, to help to get them to the other side of the pandemic. Now, at the same time, there are some areas of concern, some of which go well beyond the budget. We need greater clarity from governments at all levels about how we'll keep Canadians safe and keep our economy functioning between now and the time when our population is being vaccinated. And we need to have a clear strategy for reopening, one that can't wait until after we have the pandemic under control. For example, we need to know the criteria that will have to be met to restart travel, and whether governments are willing to use digital vaccination certificates to both make us safer and allow us to get our ordinary lives back sooner. We also need to keep an eye on the longer term. We know that despite all the subsidies and stimulus spending, the only real path to sustainable growth starts with helping this country's businesses create more opportunities for more Canadians. And that's our starting point today. Here to engage the business community in a conversation about recovery is the author of this week's budget, one of the smartest and hardest working people in the federal government, a scholar, a former journalist, an author, and simultaneously Canada's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Christia, thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the Chamber Network.
Thank you very much, Perrin. And I really want to thank you personally. For Chamber members, you should know that at particular sort of moments during the crisis, I would call Perrin up, sometimes late in the evening, just to ask for his advice on particular measures and to understand what was needed and what the impact was. As authors say about books, all the mistakes are my own, but the advice has been appreciated, and the accessibility. And what I would also like to say, just before we get into things, to all the members of Canada's Chambers of Commerce, to all of the business people, to all of the entrepreneurs, and especially to the small business people across Canada, is thank you very, very much. I can only imagine how hard it has been for many of you to keep going during COVID and to keep going, through this roller coaster of new and different challenges and a changing, a situation that has changed month by month. And I want to say to you, first of all, I am so admiring of your resilience and the innovative and entrepreneurial way that you individually and collectively have responded to the crisis. And I'll tell you the number that really, the data point to me that speaks to that. And that is that Canada's fourth quarter GDP grew by almost 10%. And that was the fourth quarter when we were moving into second wave lockdowns. And what that says to me is so many of you figured out how to function in these really tough conditions. So bravo to you. Thanks a lot. And then the second thing I want to say is I really know that small businesses, I know that the economic pain of this crisis has been very uneven. There are some sectors of the economy, some people who have not been hit at all and are actually doing better than even before the crisis. But then there are some sectors who have been hit the hardest, and that is particularly small businesses, particularly in tourism and hospitality. I am really aware of that. And that was front of mind for me in putting together this budget, to go to where the pain is. And I look forward to talking about that in a little more detail. And then the third thing I want to say is I really believe that the single greatest imperative for Canada right now is jobs and growth. And I know that jobs and growth come from all of you who are listening. My job is to support you as you create jobs and growth. And especially, I would say, small businesses create the overwhelming majority of jobs in this country. So I see myself as having a responsibility to set the stage for you to do that, to recover from the wounds of COVID and to come roaring back. And I look forward to talking with Perrin and via Perrin with you all about some of the things we've put in place that I hope will help you.
Minister, thank you for that. And there's no question that there's a good deal of pent-up demand in the economy, and that as we get into the latter part of the year and as restrictions start to come off, we'll see the economy beginning to bounce back. I want to pick up on that, though, if I can, just to start. We were looking for potentially a fiscal anchor in the budget. It's not there, but there are fiscal targets. And you were looking at taking a deficit down that last year was $354.2 billion. And your projection is that by 25-26, the deficit will be $30.7 billion. That's a dramatic change, which is going to require very significant growth in the private sector to achieve it. How confident are you of the ability to achieve those targets?
I'm confident, Perrin. Otherwise, I wouldn't have put them down in the budget. We believe that our GDP projections are prudent and reasonable. And as you know from your time in government, Perrin, we don't make up the numbers ourselves. We don't believe in marking our own homework or drinking our own Kool-Aid. Finance has a long established tradition of consulting with private sector economists and using their predictions as the basis for our model. So I'm confident about the numbers we have in the budget. And if I may, Perrin, I'd just like to speak to the fiscal anchor point. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
So I'm glad that you raise it because I know that that's something a lot of people are thoughtful about. And I want to say to all of you, I think about that a lot also. And I have spent a lot of time thinking about and being careful about the fiscal track in the budget. I have partly, I guess, my dad to thank for that. He's a farmer, and farmers, those of you who come from a farming background, will probably know the prudence of that kind of a culture. And my dad would call me up every couple of days while we were doing the budget and say, just remember, be careful about the money. And I think in this budget, we really have been. So the fiscal anchors that I would point people to are there is a declining debt to GDP ratio. We had to spend a lot of money last year to fight COVID and to support you, to support Canadian businesses and Canadian workers as COVID hit our country. And we're going to have to spend more money this year, continuing some of that support and giving the Canadian economy the boost it needs to punch our way out of the COVID recession. But after that, we show in this budget a steadily declining debt to GDP curve, and we end up at 49.2% in 25-26. And I'd like people to know that even today, Canada still has the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7, simply because everyone else has had to spend a lot of money too to get through COVID. And then in the final year, 25-26, as you mentioned, Perrin, we are forecasting a deficit of $30.7 billion and as a percent of GDP of just over 1%. So this is a big budget. We are focused chiefly on jobs and growth, and we think the government needs to invest to turbocharge that. But we also believe our spending needs to be sustainable and prudent. And we believe we've put forward a budget that does that.
Can I pick up on that point? When we talk about government investments, and there's significant spending here, obviously, in the budget. This is the first recession in memory for most of us, certainly, where household savings have actually grown during the recession, and largely as a result of transfers from government. We know that the economy has been essentially in a medically induced coma for the past year, and when that's removed, we will see the economy springing back. Why was it necessary to build in as much in terms of stimulus into this budget, particularly when we're still dealing with historically low interest rates?
So I have a few answers to that question. The first one is, I think we really need to be careful about averages when it comes to this recession, because it's been so uneven. And there's this joke that statisticians tell, that a person is on average has the ideal body temperature when their feet are in the freezer and their head is in the oven. And I think that is a good description of the Canadian economy and of Canadian people. Some of us are doing really, really well, but some of us are doing really, really badly. And what this budget really does is focuses on the people who have been, through no fault of their own, the businesses and the people, really hammered by COVID, and lifting them up and giving them some support. So that's answer one. Answer two, Perrin, is I really believe that the whole world has learned a lesson from the response to the 2008, 2009 recession. And I attended about 2 weeks ago the IMF World Bank meetings. And this conclusion that I had come to for Canada, I heard echoed by the G7 leaders in the room for sure, and the IMF. And I would say the lesson we learned from 2009 is not to be too sanguine or too languid in the driving the recovery from a recession, that it can really hurt not just an economy, but a whole society if you let that economic hardship fester. And in fact, even in Canada, which thanks to our great banking system, was less hit by the 2008, 2009 recession than many other countries. Even in Canada, it took a full decade for labor force participation levels to recover to where they had been before 2009. And I am just so committed to not letting that happen to us. On labor force, I want to get employment back to pre-crisis levels as fast as possible. And the same is true when it comes to our economy's capacity. I don't want us to be permanently lower because of this crisis. I want to push us back up to where we were, and actually to above that. And I know this audience is quite a data-driven, kind of numbersy group. So if you feel like it, on page 50 of our budget book, there are some great graphs that show our view of where the Canadian economy would be absent the extra boost the government is offering, versus where we hope the trend line growth can be pushed to thanks to the added support we're providing. So it's about jobs and growth. And we really believe that with this extra push, we can get back the jobs and get back the growth sooner. I think that's going to help every single person who's listening to this call, every single Canadian. And Perrin, it will help us pay off that debt you asked about at the beginning.
Now, you mentioned it in your response, the unevenness of the recession, that different sectors were hit differently, and particularly small and medium-sized businesses were very hard hit. And I want, first of all, to thank you for the extension of the wage and rental subsidies through into the fall, because that is critical for tens of thousands of businesses across the country. Are you flexible on the timetable for termination of those programs? if we find that this drags on longer than anticipated?
Yes.
That's a straightforward answer. And in
And
terms
I
of,
will say, I wanted it to be a clear answer. We've put that in writing in the budget book. And we have put forward some different scenarios. So we understand that we don't have a crystal ball, that this virus is very unpredictable, and our commitment has been to do whatever it takes, and that continues to be our commitment.
can we turn to sectors that are particularly hard hit? Which sectors do you identify as the ones that are particularly vulnerable, and what specific measures do you have in the budget to assist them?
So I would say small business in general has been hardest hit. And then in small businesses, and I don't think I'm saying anything revelatory here, Perrin, I think it's pretty apparent to everyone. Hospitality and tourism have been really, really hardest hit. Anyone who has depended on doing services in person, or who has depended on people being able to travel freely across the country and into the country has been hardest hit. What are we doing for those businesses? I would give you an answer in two parts. The first is we are extending the support measures. And the support, as you know, everyone on this call will know, has been designed so that the most support goes to those sectors who need it the most, and not just those sectors, but those businesses. And so the wage support, the rent support, the lockdown support, we recognize people still need it. And so it's going to be there until September 25th. On top of that, we want to help you guys pivot from, I like your phrase, Perrin, being in a coma, to recovering from that coma and, I don't know, jumping out of the bed and skipping and hopping around. And to help with that pivot, we are introducing a new hiring credit program that will run from June to November. And that program has been quite intentionally designed to offer a lot of support to seasonal businesses. Because where we're going to give you credit is in the delta between how you were doing in March and how you're doing in the summer. So if you have a seasonal business that is going to be doing better in the summer, that program is going to especially give you a boost because we think you need it. So that's sort of the big, sort of the really big business support programs that are out there for getting through the end of COVID and the recovery. And then we have a number of programs that are there, both sector specific and very small business focused, to help you guys really come roaring back. There is a new tourism recovery fund that we announced in the budget. It does what it says on the tin. It's going to be specifically targeted at the tourism industry. We have a lot of encouragement to get Canadians traveling again. We have some significant support for Destination Canada to do some of that marketing for tourism and hospitality. A lot of support for local events and festivals, again, to encourage people to be out there. And then probably the stuff I'm the most excited about, Perrin, is a really significant suite of programs to help small businesses invest in themselves and adopt new technologies. We are for 3 years increasing the amount that you can, the amount of investment you can expense to $1.5 million. Please take advantage of that. This is the moment for you guys to invest in yourselves and really make your business better than ever. And a program that I really have high hopes for, which is our technology adoption program, where we're going to provide micro credits for businesses to adopt new technologies. And then we're going to very quickly train a Canadian Technology Adoption Corps to go out there and help you adopt these new technologies. In my own house, my children are the unpaid IT support staff of me. My daughter, who is 20 and is studying applied math, was assigned yesterday morning to get a vaccine appointment for me and my husband. And I bet all of you know some really smart kids like that who are great at technology. Now we're actually going to have a technology adoption corps like that of 30,000 young Canadians across the country. And they're going to actually be available to you to go to your business and help you really, really power into the future. So sorry for that long answer, Perrin. There's even more stuff we're doing, but it's a real focus of this budget.
Great. In your answer, you mentioned travel and tourism. Obviously related to that is the airline sector. You've announced an agreement with Air Canada. Can we anticipate imminent agreements with other airlines? And is there specific provision in the budget to assist the airports in Canada?
So we are talking to the other airlines, and I would say those conversations are going well. Each airline has its own particular characteristics, but we really do recognize that airlines have been particularly hit by the COVID recession and by the travel restrictions. And we know that Canadian society needs airlines, and the Canadian economy needs airlines. We announced, Perrin, in the fall economic statement, specific support for airports. The measures in the fall economic statement have not finished making their way through the legislative process. But I think I'm at the Senate on Friday, if not Friday of this week, Friday of next week. And hopefully our colleagues, the senators, will help us in getting the fall economic statement measures approved, and then there will be support coming to airports.
Great, thank you. Now, we are fast approaching the date for filing federal income tax, and we're hearing from smaller accountancy firms and from many individuals that they're struggling to meet the state. The process is significantly more complicated because of tightening lockdowns in places like Ontario. The US has extended some filing deadlines. Are you willing to do the same for Canadian businesses and also to delay the timing for GST, HST remittances?
So let me say, first of all, I do really recognize how hard it is to do everything right now, including finish preparing and filing our taxes. And to all the accountants who are in this meeting with us, thank you very much. We really, really need you. It's important for us to encourage Canadians and Canadian businesses to be filing their taxes, because the CRA, as a kind of machine of government, has really, it's been like the tractor that is pulling the major implements that have plowed the fields and harrowed the fields and seeded the fields through this COVID period. We've done so much of the support has been channeled through the CRA, support for people and support for businesses. And so we don't want to discourage people from filing and therefore being eligible for the support that we think they need and getting the support that they need. So that's a reason that we really want to maintain the integrity of the system and of the timetable. Having said that, we recognize, the CRA recognizes that this is a particularly tough year. And so there are strong relief provisions in place to provide flexibility where needed, where there are particular circumstances beyond a person's or a business's control. And I would urge people, take advantage of that. Don't be shy about putting your hand up and saying, this specific thing has happened in this COVID year. And then there is one overall provision that I'd like to take this opportunity to remind people about, which is in February, we announced 1 year of interest relief on taxes owing for anyone who received COVID benefits if your taxable income is below $75,000. So for that category of Canadians, and it's a pretty big one, it's not due until April of next year.
Thank you. We have applauded the initiatives that have been taken by the government over the course of the past year to provide support for Canadian families and Canadian businesses. It's been essential, and we simply couldn't have functioned without it over the course of the last 12 months. But when we look at restoring the health of our economy, we're going to have to move away from a lockdown and subsidies-based economy to one where both individuals and businesses can become self-sustaining again. One of the things that business is looking for, and it couldn't all be included in the budget, but it's critical, is a clear strategy for reopening. Do you anticipate setting out that plan, not waiting until after we've got the pandemic under control, but giving lead time? Such issues as, even if we don't know on what date the border can be reopened, what are the criteria for reopening? What the government's policy is with regard to digital vaccination certificates, and whether or not that will enable us to reopen the economy a little bit more quickly. Other targets the government may have that will allow business to do more planning.
So let me start, Perrin, by saying something that you may not want to hear and your members may not want to hear. And that is that right now, I think we need to remember, much as we want everything to reopen, we need to remember that right now, in many parts of the country, we need to stay home as much as possible. And we need to stay as close to home as possible. Now, and I'm so sorry to say this to all of our tourism businesses, but now is not the time to travel. Now, obviously, is not the time to be doing in-person things at all. And I know that this third wave and the lockdowns that it has necessitated has been really difficult news for so many people. I hear about it in my own community. I live in the riding I represent, and people shout at me from across the street. Shout is the wrong word, but share their stories with me from across the street. So I'm so aware, and it's so heartbreaking. But I really want to urge all of us, let's just hang in there. Vaccines are coming really, really quickly now to Canada, and the vaccination campaign is really picking up speed. I really believe if we do the right thing now for a few more weeks, the vaccination can outpace the variants, and we can really have a great summer. So point one is, I think before focusing on reopening, we need to actually focus on finishing the fight against COVID. When it comes to reopening, from my perspective, the vaccines and getting Canadians vaccinated is the single most important thing for all of us to do. All of us, anyone who is eligible for a vaccine, should go out and get one. And let's not take for granted our ability to vaccinate all eligible Canadians. And by that, I mean we are seeing other countries run into significant either vaccine hesitancy barriers or simply vaccine accessibility. And I would urge everyone on this call, as a business leader in their community, please Encourage people in your communities to get vaccinated. Encourage your customers, encourage your friends, encourage your neighbors. That's going to make the single biggest difference. The Prime Minister and I had a wonderful call yesterday with pharmacists from across the country, and they talked about the efforts they're making there. That's just the best way we can all help each other. Third point, Perrin, is I am a big believer in the importance of getting our rapid tests out across the country. The federal government has procured tens of millions of rapid tests, and these have been deployed across provinces. We have some great pilot programs going with organizations like Communitech in Waterloo, the Creative Destruction Labs in my own riding, on how businesses can use these rapid tests. And Health Canada and the PM, Patty Hajdu and the Prime Minister are working really hard on some great efforts to get the rapid tests out directly to companies so you can use them to operate even more safely. And then final point, Perrin, in terms of specific border issues, one thing that I would remind us all about is this virus is, as one doctor has said to me, it's very sneaky. It has proven, it has surprised us quite a few times along the way, including with the variants and including with the places in the world where new variants have been popping up. And so I think that it's important for all of us, certainly for policymakers, to be humble in the face of that unpredictability and uncertainty, and to be aware of, to know everything that we don't know and that is right now unknowable. And I know that that kind of an approach, a humble approach, which takes into account the uncertain course of the virus, can be hard for businesses, because what you all want, very understandably, is predictability and certainty and knowing when and how things will happen. I think we need all of us to have just a little bit of flexibility, because we're dealing with a threat which is flexible in how it attacks us.
Minister, on the issue of rapid testing, the chambers of commerce in Kitchener-Waterloo and in Cambridge have been instrumental in rolling out these test kits to small and medium-sized businesses. And we are in discussions, the Canadian Chamber is, with Health Canada about the possibility of using the chamber network to push out the distribution of those tests to SMEs across the country. We're also pressing provincial governments who can, with the stroke of a pen, change the regulations on the administration of the tests and no longer require that it be a medically trained personnel who's conducting the tests. So we'll do everything we can to collaborate there. I want to just, though, pursue the question of whether or not we should know the criteria at this point. Everybody accepts that the timetable is impossible to know for sure, because we just simply don't know what's going to, the disease has surprised us in so many instances. The government yesterday rolled over for another month the closure of the Canada-US border. I'm not asking for a date. I'm asking for the criteria. It's not like a light switch where a business can simply throw the switch and everything's up and running, but we need to be planning now for knowing what are the circumstances and what are the strategies which will allow us to transition from lockdown to reopening.
And again there, Perrin, what I would say is, in terms of the strategies, I think we've talked about them a lot already. And the strategies are, let's follow public health advice to get the virus under control. Let's get vaccinated and encourage all of our friends and neighbors to get vaccinated. And I'm very, I didn't know how much I could say about the work that you're doing on the rapid testing. So thank you for disclosing that. I'm very encouraged by the work that's happening on rapid testing. And I think there's a lot we can do within our own country on all of those fronts, and I think we should focus on those. When it comes to the border, I just think that we need to have a precautionary principle in mind. I think actually it has been a great success of Canadians and Americans that we have managed to close our border longer and harder than at any time in our history, and at the same time that essential trade has continued. That is a remarkable thing, and something I was really worried about whether we could pull it off to keep ourselves safe. But we all know how much the trade across that border is a lifeline for our country and for the US. So I think that actually, collectively, we've done a really good job there. And I think that we just need to be careful and thoughtful about next steps because it's the virus real truly has defied anyone's predictions so far. The only other thing I will say, which I think is very positive and should reassure people on the border front, is we have a terrific, very, very effective working relationship with the new US administration. The Prime Minister, I think, even as we speak, he is speaking to President Biden. And we have very close and good contacts all the time. And I think that is really going to help us to turn the dial on this very important and very delicate issue. Conversations are already happening.
Thank you. Minister, before the session began, we invited participants to submit questions for you. Let's turn to some of those. The first one's from Peter Smith. What does the government plan to do to help support businesses that opened during COVID? I ask this because some businesses like hotels are required to open or face severe financial penalties.
Thank you very much for the question, Peter. And when it comes to new businesses that took that brave step of actually opening up after COVID hit, let me just start by saying there has been a real challenge for us in with all of our support programs in balancing, on the one hand, our belief, which we have acted on, that Canadian businesses needed massive support at scale to get through this coma. You know, we recognized governments were asking them to go into a coma, and we needed to make sure that they could survive. And I really believe that preventing economic scarring, in addition to, preserving us from a lot of human hardship, is one of the reasons the Canadian economy has proven to be so resilient and that we had that 10% growth in the fourth quarter. And Perrin, as a former minister, will be sympathetic to this particularly, I hope. When you roll out huge multi-billion-dollar programs like that, you always have to be thoughtful about program integrity. And Canadians expect us as a government, of course, to support Canadian businesses, but they want to be sure that that money is going to where it's supposed to go and that there aren't big openings for fraud in the system. So we've also designed the programs with an eye to program integrity. And I know that there are thousands and thousands of people who really bravely and with real chutzpah started new businesses post-COVID. But I think everyone can appreciate, absent a record of what your business was doing before COVID, it becomes really, really hard to figure out how you would deliver support. With a business that existed before, we have some clear metrics. We can see what the business performance was before COVID, and the support measures can be based on that. So I'm not asking people to feel my pain, but I do want to explain that there is that big structural challenge, which doesn't exist for businesses that existed pre-COVID. Having said that, Peter, as I said at the beginning of my remark, at the beginning of my answers to Perrin, I believe that our recovery has to be driven by businesses, by entrepreneurs. That's where we're going to get the jobs. That's where we're going to get the economic growth. And that's why there are so many measures in this budget to help a young, new entrepreneurial business not just keep going, but grow faster than ever. Our small business financing program has been expanded. Eligible expenses will now include startup costs. There's a new line of credit to help with operating expenses. The maximum loan amount has been increased to $500,000. The repayment period for some loans has been increased to 15 years. And that is something that new businesses can use. I talked about our new expensing of up to $1.5 million of investment. And that's just for 3 years, everyone. So please take advantage of it now while you can. Buy while supplies last, please. And I've talked about the technology adoption program for small businesses that I am really, really excited about. That should help too. And then very quickly, because I see Perrin leaning in to ask another question, there is significant support here for businesses specifically in tourism and in culture.
Great, thank you. David Downey from Arco Info asks, what is the government doing to drive and fund innovation related to technologies that make inhabitants, owners, tenants, service personnel, customers, etc., feel safe about returning indoors based on data-driven metrics?
Okay, well, we've talked about that already a little bit, Perrin, in terms of talking about the rapid testing. And I think some exciting work is being done, some exciting cooperation between government and business, and actually between government and you guys and the chamber on the rapid testing front. And I'm enthusiastic about that. The budget includes almost $500 million for airports and that enhanced infrastructure to help safe travel once public health allows it, and to give people that certainty. I've talked already about the new business support programs, including the technology adoption program, which should also really, really help in that space. I was so enthusiastic, my pen jumped up.
Minister, we have a question that was submitted by Lisa Kowalchuk from your home province of Alberta with regard to childcare. And we haven't had a chance to talk about childcare as yet. And I'm going to piggyback one on myself. This obviously was the single biggest announcement you were making in terms of social/economic policy in the budget. The Canadian Chamber's focus has been on the immediate. What can we do to ensure the provision of adequate open spaces in communities so that women are able to get back to work returning from the pandemic? What was in the budget specifically targeted at that as opposed to the long-term national program? And then Lisa's question is, we were pleased with many of the components of Monday's budget and the continued supports for business. One question that has surfaced with the National Childcare Strategy, will that include both private and not-for-profit operators? There's a concern that the path to $10 a day daycare, childcare will only be available to certain operators, creating inequity in childcare.
Okay, well, thanks for the questions. And hi, Lisa. Your last name sounds like you, in addition to being from Alberta, as I am originally, you might even be Ukrainian Canadian like me. On early learning and childcare, let me just say for a start, Perrin, that you're right. This is a major push in the budget. And it's there because we believe in it. We think that this is feminist policy. We think this is great for Canadian parents and Canadian children. But Perrin, it's also there because of what we've been talking about today. You know, I would say the core issue you and I have addressed is, how do we get growth in Canada? How do we push the Canadian economy to a higher level of productivity? And so in preparing the budget, that was a question that we asked ourselves, that I asked the team, you know, what are the policies that are really we need to do two things. We need to jumpstart the recovery, but I want to do more than that. I want us to be on a permanently higher growth trajectory. It's something actually which the former governor of the Bank of Canada, Stephen Poloz, has talked about really eloquently, that what we need to do is have permanently higher growth. So we were on the hunt for policies that would do that. And early learning and childcare is, I would say, one of two really big policies out there that if we can get them in place, and that's a big if, that there is universal agreement actually permanently would make Canada more productive. Our economists here at Finance believe that if we can get early learning and childcare in place, it will be the biggest permanent boost to Canadian productivity since the NAFTA trade deal. So that's why it's really, really important for this budget at this time for us to make that long-term financial, but also kind of political investment of political will to do it and to get it done. And I do want to mention, Perrin, what the second big policy is that I think could do it. Because you mentioned it in your own sort of post-budget report. You touched on something that not a lot of other people have touched on, and that is lowering inter-provincial barriers to trade. It is also a truth universally acknowledged among everyone who thinks about such things, that if we could have truly free trade inside Canada, that's a total freebie for all levels of government. It wouldn't cost us anything, and it would really boost Canada's economic output. It would boost our growth. It would make everybody more prosperous. And there are some significant measures. Again, they don't cost money. They don't cost a lot of money, but there are significant measures in this budget to help push us together in that direction. And I'd like to take the opportunity to ask you, Perrin, and your members, you highlighted it in your report on the budget. So please help me to get this done. The federal government is totally supportive, and we just need to sort of get a national drive there and get the national support. And then the third big kind of game-changing policy is improving productivity and efficiency of small businesses. So if we could do those three things, Canada would be on a permanently higher growth track, and we would be all more prosperous.
Minister, thank you. Particularly as it relates to interprovincial barriers to trade, we applaud the government's initiative there. It's you're well aware of the challenges there are in actually making progress in this field. You will have our full support. We'll do everything we can to get those barriers dismantled. Let me come back to the question of childcare, though. The two questions: what is there in the budget to help with the immediate need that there is for women to be able to return to work? And secondly, Lisa's question about whether for-profit or not-for-profit are included in that.
Yeah, no, sorry, Perrin. I got so carried away with my three big ways to permanently raise our level of growth. So specifically on childcare, of course, we understand that there are immediate needs, and actually there are immediate hits that the child care system and that families have suffered because of COVID. And that's why a significant, and to be really specific, a lot of childcare providers lost revenue during COVID because people kept their kids home. And we don't need childcare providers to be closing down. We need them to be opening up. We need even more. And so the Safe Restart Agreement of last summer, which was more than $20 billion, had significant funds there for childcare providers to keep them going. We also recognize that young families have just faced real immediate hardship. I think the Prime Minister and I, with Ahmed Hussein, the minister who's going to be responsible for getting early learning and childcare done, did a meeting this morning with a whole bunch of young families from across the country, and they were all like upbeat and wonderful, and their kids were there, but you could just see the strain on them from trying to keep it together. And that's why in the fall economic statement, we committed to an additional $1,200 for parents of children 6 and under, just to say, just to recognize and to support that extra cost that they have borne. And again, Perrin, that fall economic statement has not yet been passed into law. And so the funds have not yet flowed. And so, but as I mentioned earlier, the legislation is moving through the legislative machine. And I am very hopeful that we will get Senate support and after that royal assent. And I think the money will come at exactly the right time when I'm hopeful the economy will be reopening. And I hope that that will really give young families that little bit of extra support. Second part of my answer on early learning and childcare and immediate versus long term may satisfy you less, Perrin. And that is, with early learning and childcare, I think we as a country face the sort of chicken and egg dilemma, which I think is one of the reasons that we've been talking for 50 years about a national system for early learning and childcare. But outside of Quebec, we haven't built one yet. And the chicken and egg problem is this is really a system that we need. And a system takes time and money to build. The money we've put on the table, so that's not the immediate problem. But what is going to be a challenge, and personally, I think Canada is up for it, is for us to accept that there will not be instant gratification. For us to say, you know what, this is worth devoting a little bit of effort to make things better for the long term. And I'm not talking about waiting 100 years. The target we've set in the budget is 5 years from now, parents across Canada should have access to early learning and childcare for, on average, $10 a day. Now, in
Sorry,
terms of
from both private and not-for-profit
so I was
operators?
just getting to that, Farron. In terms of where, where we see the childcare provision coming from, let me just say this. We really recognize that this is a team effort of the federal government and provinces and territories. And we put some ambitious objectives and a lot of money in the budget. And I think it's fair to give the provinces and territories some time to really absorb that. But we are keen to begin bilateral negotiations with them to do those bilateral deals. The agreements are going to be different in every province and territory depending on the needs because the situation is different across the country. Our focus from the government's point of view will be high quality spaces, affordable spaces, accessible spaces, and ensuring that we have well qualified and well paid early childhood educators, because that's what it takes to have high quality childcare. So those are going to be our starting propositions. And I really look forward to, and Ahmed really looks forward to talking to provinces and territories about what specifically that means in every part of the country.
Thank you. Time is really flying here, and because of your schedule, we need to stop by the
I
top
thought you were
of the
going to say
hour.
because my answers are too long, Perrin,
No,
for
not
which
at
I
all.
apologize.
But I think we have time for two more questions that were submitted. One of them you've touched on already, and that's the issue of the restaurant sector. Larry Isaacs from the Firkin group of pubs asked the question: does the government have a plan to provide a relief package for the hospitality industry, one of the most severely damaged industries, which is the fourth largest employer in Canada? Do you want to elaborate on what you were saying earlier with regard particularly to that sector?
Sure. And to save time, I won't repeat too much things I've already said, but I would say our really powerful business support programs, wage subsidy, rent support, lockdown support, which now today applies to a lot of restaurants. Those are there. I hope people are using them. We have extended them, as you, Perrin, and your members asked us to do, through to the end of September. There is now a new hiring credit, which is going to be there too. All of these programs help the hardest hit sectors by definition the most. So they help hospitality, they help tourism, they help airlines, because that's where the pain is. And the hiring credit, as I mentioned, has a sort of added kicker that for seasonal businesses, it's gonna be focused the most on you and help you the most, because I think you need it. And please also, the suite of measures that are in there to help businesses invest in themselves and become even more productive. I have been astonished at, as I said, the resilience, the entrepreneurship of Canadian businesses in dealing with COVID. I think it has been the nudge that has prompted a lot of businesses to go digital that maybe had been procrastinating before. And these programs are meant to give you a little bit more juice in doing that. And I hope you'll take advantage of them.
Thank you. Then a final question, which comes from Jeff Gobet of George Weston. The digital services tax results in a double taxation for Canadian businesses. Will be taxed both on digital services revenue as well as digital services income under existing tax rules. Will relief from double taxation be provided?
So thanks for the question. And let me first of all say something that may be of comfort to Jeff, which is this is only going to apply to large businesses with a revenue of about $1.125 billion Canadian. So there are, and that's for international consistency. The idea behind this tax is that we are very hopeful there will be international agreement around it and that the Canadian provisions can dovetail. So that measure has been put in place so that it fits with the international negotiation that is happening now. And that's why, Jeff, I think that your question, I think that provision will answer 99.9% of your question. And I'd like to say two more things on the digital services tax. First of all, with the election of the new US administration, my optimism around our concluding at the OECD a deal on this has increased a lot. And that is a really, really positive thing for the world. And really, Canada's decision to say we're going to unilaterally impose a tax, but only until a multilateral agreement comes into force. It's really just about applying a little bit of deadline pressure and being clear that we're going to move forward no matter what. But I want people to know I'm optimistic about the possibilities of reaching a deal. And I've spoken about it with Secretary Yellen and also with European counterparts. And then the third thing I would say about the digital services tax is this is really a matter of fairness. And it's a matter of fairness, first and foremost, for Canadian businesses. That because of the nature of the 21st century digital economy, there are a lot of businesses that are can be doing a lot of business, benefiting from customers' data inside countries, but not liable to taxation inside those countries. And so I really see this as a positive measure, as a leveling the playing field measure.
Well, Minister, we've reached the top of the hour. We could continue for many, many more questions, but we've covered an enormous territory over the course of the last 60 minutes. I want to thank you very much for taking the time out to meet with us. And I want to acknowledge as well the effort that you've made in terms of keeping the lines of communication open. You mentioned at the outset the fact that you reach out yourself regularly from time to time. And one of the extraordinary characteristics that we've seen is that not only are you good in terms of communicating, but you're good in terms of listening as well. And that's appreciated by Canada's business community. We thank you for the efforts you've made in terms of supporting Canada's businesses over the course of the past year. We wish you good luck in the coming year. And certainly we want to signal to you that we're there to assist as a partner in any way we can in the success of Canada's economy and in our success in defeating COVID-19.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Perrin. Thank you very much to all your members who are with us. I wish I could see you all. And I want to thank you for this conversation. I'd like to thank all of you for your ideas for the budget. And most of all, I want to thank you for getting through COVID and showing such remarkable resilience. And I want to let you know I'm counting on you, and Canadians are counting on you to come roaring back. And I want to do everything I can to help.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you all for attending today.